Massachusetts has 7.2 million people. Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine combined have 3.5 million. One state, smaller than either Vermont or Maine in land area, outnumbers all three of them put together by more than double. But the strange part isn't the numbers. The strange part is that this ratio has barely changed since 1790. The gap was locked in before George Washington finished his first term, and every decade since has only widened it. The question isn't why northern New England fell behind. It's why it was never ahead in the first place. And the answer starts with a failed colony in 1607 that most Americans have never heard of. If you're into understanding why geography shapes where Americans actually live, consider subscribing. We do these deep dives every week. The colony that died in the cold. 13 years before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, English colonists tried to settle northern New England first. The Popham Colony was established in 1607 at the mouth of Maine's Kennebec River, and it was supposed to be England's American foothold, a permanent base, a new beginning. It lasted exactly one winter. The colonists described conditions so brutal that half the men returned to England before spring. The cold was relentless. Supplies ran short. The rivers froze. The rest of the settlers abandoned the colony entirely by 1608, leaving behind half-finished buildings and a single ship they'd constructed during their miserable months on shore. The land had rejected them, not through war or disease, but through sheer, grinding cold. When the next wave of English settlers arrived, they chose differently. Plymouth in 1620, Massachusetts Bay in 1630. They planted roots further south, not because they preferred warmer weather on principle, but because they'd already learned what happened to those who tried the north. The Popham Colony wasn't a footnote, it was a warning. But this wasn't random bad luck. The geography of New England had already chosen its winners long before anyone arrived to test it. Why the South was always going to win. Southern New England sits at a geographic sweet spot that the colonists recognized immediately. Boston Harbor is one of the finest natural deep-water ports on the Atlantic coast, protected from storms, accessible to large ships, and rarely frozen even in the coldest winters. The Connecticut River Valley offered fertile bottomland, the kind of soil that actually rewarded farming. And the growing season stretches 150 to 180 days, long enough that a late frost was a setback rather than a catastrophe. Northern New England is defined by obstacles. The White Mountains of New Hampshire rise like a wall across the landscape. Maine's interior is rugged, forested, and difficult to traverse. Rivers in the north are smaller, faster, and harder to navigate. Good for logging, terrible for commerce. The growing season shrinks to 100 to 130 days, short enough that a single cold snap in May could destroy an entire year's work. And the coastline, while stunningly beautiful, lacks the protected harbors that made Boston and Providence into trading powerhouses. The earliest settlements concentrated where the land cooperated. By 1640, Massachusetts Bay Colony had 20,000 residents. Northern New England remained a scattered frontier, a few fishing villages, a handful of trading posts, and miles of unbroken forest. Geography explains the starting position, but what happened next turned a small advantage into an unbridgeable gap. The war that burned the frontier. In 1675, the bloodiest war in American colonial history erupted across New England. King Philip's War, named for the Wampanoag leader Metacom, whom the English called King Philip, devastated the northern frontier in ways the South never experienced. Over 3 years of fighting, more than half of New England's towns were attacked. But the destruction fell unevenly. Northern settlements were exposed and isolated, connected by rough trails rather than roads, surrounded by forests that provided cover for raiders. Entire communities in Maine and New Hampshire were burned to the ground. Survivors fled south with whatever they could carry. Some towns wouldn't be resettled for decades. Southern New England suffered too. Proportionally, King Philip's War killed more colonists per capita than any conflict in American history. But population density was already an advantage. Militias could mobilize faster. Supply lines held. Boston remained untouched behind its defenses. When the war ended in 1678, the South recovered quickly. Trade resumed. Farms were replanted. The economy kept building. The North had to start over from near zero. repopulating abandoned settlements, rebuilding burned farms, and convincing frightened colonists that the frontier was worth the risk. The population gap that existed in 1675 had doubled by 1700. The North was trying to rebuild when the climate delivered another blow. The winter that proved them right. In late February and early March of 1717, 4 massive nor'easters struck New England in rapid succession. The storms dumped between 8 and 16 feet of snow across the region in a matter of weeks. The diarist Cotton Mather called it as great a snow as has been known in the memory of man. But the impact wasn't equal. Northern New England, already colder and more exposed, experienced the worst of it. Drifts buried entire houses up to their chimneys. Livestock froze in barns that farmers couldn't reach. One account described cattle discovered in spring, still standing frozen upright where they died. The diarist Samuel Sewall recorded that travel became impossible for weeks. Roads vanished completely, and communities were cut off from each other and from any help. Southern New England received heavy snow too, but milder temperatures meant faster melting and quicker recovery. The infrastructure of cities like Boston could absorb the shock in ways that scattered northern farms simply could not. When you have neighbors nearby, you can dig each other out. When your nearest neighbor is 2 miles away through chest-deep snow, you're on your own. The Great Snow of 1717 reinforced what colonists already suspected. The North was survivable but punishing. It discouraged expansion and encouraged consolidation in the South, where life was hard but not quite so relentless. At this point, the North was behind, but it could still theoretically catch up. The gap was significant but not permanent. Then 1825 arrived and everything changed. The canal that killed a region. By the early 1800s, northern New England had finally built a functioning agricultural economy. Vermont's hillsides were covered with sheep farms. Maine's forests fed a booming timber industry. New Hampshire had small-scale grain production and dairy operations. The rocky soil was difficult, but generations of farmers had learned to work it. Stone walls crisscrossed the landscape, marking fields cleared by hand over decades of back-breaking labor. Then the Erie Canal opened in 1825. Suddenly, grain from Ohio and the Midwest could reach East Coast markets for a fraction of what it cost to ship from Vermont. The canal connected the Great Lakes to the Hudson River, and then to New York City, a continuous water route that made Western grain cheap enough to undercut anyone trying to farm New England's stubborn soil. New England farmers couldn't compete. Within a generation, farms across northern New England were abandoned. Families packed up and moved west, chasing the same cheap land that was destroying their livelihoods. Stone walls that once marked property lines now run through second-growth forests, monuments to fields that no longer exist, maintained by no one, slowly sinking into the earth. But southern New England responded differently to this agricultural collapse. Francis Cabot Lowell had already built America's first integrated textile mill in Waltham, Massachusetts in 1814. As farming became impossible, southern cities pivoted to manufacturing with stunning speed. The same rivers that couldn't compete with Midwestern grain could power industrial machinery. Water didn't care what it spun. Lowell, Massachusetts, became a manufacturing powerhouse. Providence built textile empires. The labor that might have worked farms instead worked looms. The capital that might have bought land instead bought machinery. Northern New England couldn't make this pivot. The infrastructure wasn't there. The capital wasn't there. The concentrated labor pool wasn't there. You can't build a factory in the middle of nowhere and expect workers to appear. The canal killed northern agriculture, but it turbocharged southern industry, and the gap that had been widening for 2 centuries suddenly became a chasm. The factories that changed everything. By 1850, southern New England had become the most industrialized region in the United States. Lowell, Massachusetts employed over 10,000 workers in textile mills alone. Providence, Rhode Island became a center for jewelry and silverware manufacturing. Hartford built insurance companies and precision manufacturing operations that would later help win world wars. But this wasn't just about having rivers to power mills. Plenty of rivers flow through northern New England. Southern New England had something more powerful: concentrated advantages that fed on themselves. Skilled labor attracted more skilled labor. When you're a machinist looking for work, you go where the machine shops already are. Capital attracted more capital. When you're an investor looking for returns, you invest where the infrastructure already exists. Railroads connected factories to ports, and ports connected to the world. Every new factory made the next factory more likely. Northern New England had none of this network effect. Its industries, logging, fishing, small-scale farming, were extractive rather than generative. They required land, not concentration. A sawmill needs trees nearby, not other sawmills. A fishing village needs access to the ocean, not a cluster of related businesses. People spread thin across the northern landscape rather than clustering in cities. And in an industrial economy, concentration is everything. The gap widened from a geographic accident into an economic law, a self-reinforcing pattern that grew stronger with every passing decade. Then came the force multiplier that made it permanent. The gravity well no one could escape. Harvard was founded in 1636, just 6 years after the Massachusetts Bay Colony arrived. Yale followed in 1701. MIT opened in 1861. By the late 1800s, southern New England had accumulated more elite educational institutions per square mile than any comparable region on Earth. But the real impact wasn't prestige, it was gravity. Universities attract young people. That's their entire purpose: to pull in the brightest minds from wherever they happen to be born and concentrate them in one place for 4 years. Some of those young people leave after graduation, but some of them stay. They start companies. They raise families. They attract more young people. Boston and its surroundings became a self-reinforcing engine of human capital. Every generation, the region pulled in talent from across New England and across the country, and enough of that talent stayed to build the next generation of institutions. The brain drain from northern New England wasn't hostile. It was just physics. Young people from Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine went to college in the South, found jobs in the South, and built lives in the South. Northern New England has colleges. Good ones: Dartmouth, Bowdoin, Bates, Colby, but not nearly enough to offset the gravitational pull of the Boston metro area. For every student who stays in New Hampshire after Dartmouth, 10 leave Vermont for Boston or New York or somewhere else entirely. This gravitational pull created something in modern times that would have seemed absurd to the Pilgrims who first stepped off the Mayflower: a concentration of wealth and innovation so dense that it dwarfs everything around it. The industry that ate 3 states. Today, the greater Boston area is home to the world's largest biotechnology cluster. Over 106,000 workers, more than $23 billion in annual economic impact. More biotech companies concentrated in a few square miles around Cambridge and Boston than in any other city on Earth. That single industry, pharmaceutical research, medical devices, genetic engineering, generates more economic activity than the entire combined economy of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. 3 states' worth of lumber and lobster and maple syrup and ski resorts outweighed by 1 neighborhood's worth of laboratories. The pattern set 4 centuries ago has compounded into something almost incomprehensible. The gap that began with harbors and growing seasons is now measured in pharmaceutical patents and venture capital rounds. Northern New England remains beautiful, livable, and beloved by tourists who flock there every summer and fall. But it cannot compete for the industries that define the 21st century economy, because those industries require exactly the kind of concentration that Northern New England has never had and cannot create. 2 New Englands. Stand in downtown Boston on a weekday morning. The sidewalks flood with workers. Construction cranes swing overhead, building new towers for companies that didn't exist a decade ago. The T runs packed with commuters. This is a global city competing with London and Singapore for talent, for investment, for the future. Now drive 5 hours north into rural Maine. The towns get smaller, the forests take over, the population thins until some counties have fewer than 15 people per square mile. It is beautiful, it is quiet, and it is almost empty. 2 regions share one name. One was chosen by geography, reinforced by war, accelerated by industry, and locked in by education. The other was passed over from the beginning. not because it lacked anything essential to human life, but because it lacked the specific advantages that allow cities to form and grow, and compound their advantages across centuries. The colonists who froze at Popham in 1607 didn't know they were writing the future of American settlement patterns. The Pilgrims who landed at Plymouth in 1620 didn't know they were choosing the winning side. But the land knew, it had always known. Geography drew the lines before anyone arrived to read them. And 400 years later, those lines remain exactly where they were first drawn, invisible on any map, but visible in every population count, every economic report, and every young person who leaves the North for a job in the South. Some patterns once set never break. If you want to see how geography shaped population patterns in other parts of America, check out the video on screen now. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. We release new deep dives every week. I'll see you in the next one.